once again welcome all of you to this webinar that we are hosting today at Cockroach Labs. We we have the webinar focused on gaming today, so it's going to be a great and exciting conversation because gaming itself, as a domain, um, as a field, is having some really awesome, cool things happening to it. Like, we're going to talk more about it. We're going to talk about trends, influences, a bunch of things that are happening in gaming and that game tech domain. And if you're here to learn about how CockroachDB on AWS can help with that, we are super excited to have you. So, today we are going to focus on unlocking, scalable, resilient gaming experiences with CockroachDB on AWS. So feel free to use the chat as well as the Q&A panel to ask questions. With that, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is David Joy. I'm a senior manager, and I lead the Partner Solutions Architect team here at Cockroach Labs. Today, I have with me my guest of honor and speaker, Ben Cook. I'm going to let him come in and introduce himself. And Ben's a really awesome person to hang out with. So I'll let him introduce himself, and we'll kick it off.
Yeah, hey, thanks, David, and hello, everybody. Ben Cook. I'm also a partner solutions architect, part of our industry and solutions team, very much focused on our gaming customers, which, by the way, I love my job. It is a blast. But we're here to talk a bit about how we can improve gaming architectures, and I'd say data management in general might be boring, but we're gonna connect this back to a number of different trends and kind of use cases within the industry. So I hope you'll find it enlightening. So with that, David, next slide, please. So what are we doing here today? We are going to dive into some of the driving forces that we're seeing in gaming, both I think from the AWS as well as the CockroachDB side of things. We're going to really look at how the evolving landscape of game development, really how AWS, along with CockroachDB, can help address these unique challenges faced by modern game studios. And let's just jump right in from here then. David, if you wouldn't mind, next slide. So I want to start off with a striking number, at least very striking to me, but there was a big survey released last year across 537 game studios, if I've got my data right. 95% of them are planning to support or launch a live service game. A game that is going to be updated and managed throughout its life cycle. I thought that was a really interesting stat, to help maintain player engagement, always bring something new and exciting to them. But of all those game studios, most of them now are feeling like live services are really necessary for the success of the title. So it's not really just a trend as much as it's becoming a new standard. Connected games. I think that's the expectation these days, is that games are connected, and with that come continuous updates. That comes multiplayer, interaction with friends and family. But with that shift, when we go from shipping a game, oh, we're done, maybe release periodic updates. When you come to the shift to live service gaming, this is really where you start to see some pretty significant challenges in scale and data management, not to mention regulatory compliance. I mean, we are going to be talking a little bit about regulated gaming in this as well. I mean, we're seeing a lot more kind of social gaming through regulated gaming, and with that though, these are some of the hurdles that we're really going to be addressing today. Next slide, please. So for gaming trends, I'll just start out with maybe an obvious one. Multiplayer games are popular. This is one where, if we've got a connected game, we're not just worried about, game connection to server. We're actually working with kind of a, three-body problem, multiplayer problem here, of latency and access for that game. Now, whether you're building a cooperative or competitive game, real-time or turn-based, the bottom line is really player experience. And so you need to be able to scale in those viral moments, you need to maintain security to protect your players, and you need to be able to serve at very low latency across the globe, all while keeping costs manageable. And so, it's a pretty tall order, but it's one of the things that's really crucial for delivering great content to your players. Next slide, please. Now, with that, I want to talk a little bit about the data revolution in gaming. With connections come the capability to generate leverage data in a number of different interesting ways. And we're seeing studios leveraging this data for personalization, server balancing, predictive analytics, or real-time insights. And but this reliance on data really brings its own set of challenges. Not only are you worried about your, game server scaling, but you're also potentially worrying about your database scaling as well. And things like real-time, processing across multiple regions, or complex data engineering, um, all these things, present challenges for presenting a globally kind of consistent experience with your content. And this ultimately underscores the critical need for a robust and globally distributed database solution. Next slide, please. So, and that's why I'm excited to be here with my colleague David to talk a little bit about CockroachDB today. This is really where it comes into play. As game development becomes more data intensive and globally distributed, traditional database solutions often fall short here. And CockroachDB offers a unique solution that helps address these challenges head on. It's not just where do I put my compute, but also where do you put your data? So we need flexible solutions like this that can really tighten the loop between, you know, game server, caching layer, database, as well as the players coming in. So from here, I'm going to hand it over to David and let him dive into CockroachDB and how it's revolutionizing game data management.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ben. So, while you were saying before I go in, I had a question. I mean, the question is, how often are you hearing about latency as a concern for gaming, users who come talk to you? Like, how often are you seeing these conversations happen?
It depends on the game type, but quite often. I mean, it's one of those metrics that is always front of mind, I believe, for game developers, is that's part of the experience. Anytime you get a hitch or gain some latency in it, you're really disrupting the experience of that player. And anything we can do to minimize latency, improve the abstraction, improve the immersion into the experience, the better. So it's absolutely top of mind when we're talking to studios.
Yeah. I mean, talking about trends, Ben, I mean, this is great. I mean, I was doing some research myself, and I'm a avid user of social platforms. And one of the things that I am observing, at least in my conversations and across socials, is this concept called vibe coding. Okay. I don't know if how many of you are familiar with this, but the idea is this AI assisted coding. And one of the top use cases for AI assisted coding is a bunch of games that users are developing. And one of the things that I've come to realize is that in these conversations, folks are not only just developing these games, they are actually putting these games out there to be used. And they want to, like, from the very beginning, want to build a game that doesn't go down. So often we are hearing that, hey, where can I deploy this? How can I make sure this game doesn't go down? It's always available. And because of AI or this whole concept of vibe coding, this has come out especially for gaming and game tech. So there are some really new creative games that are coming out, and I feel like more and more users are going to be developing games, and they're going to be running on AWS. They will need to scale and will require high availability. Anyway, so with that, I mean, let's just continue a little bit more. And I wanted to talk about, like, while folks are developing games today, and Ben kind of hinted on this, not all games are the same. Obviously we know there are multiplayer games, there are RPG games, a bunch of different games. I am a player who loves to play FIFA. or I would love to play like a racing game. Not all games are the same. The reality is, with CockroachDB, we've come to realize there are two different gaming experiences that we are really good at helping our users with. Like, one is real-time gaming, and with real-time gaming, the whole idea is that these are these fast-paced games with like battle royales or multiplayer, where you need to have leaderboards, and the expectation is that it needs to be millisecond, response times, and these are real-time games. So users want to do seamless matchmaking, multiplayer coordination, and these games are a little bit more advanced. They're developed on like more complex, gaming engines, and so there will be physics, and so there needs to be a scale. On how users start playing this across the globe, and how there is low latency response times when folks are using these games. However, we have also seen great success in real money gaming. Real money gaming is essentially simply, games that are, app based, like betting apps, where users have actual money, their own money, that they're putting in to, bet on, different games, sporting events, or, they're playing certain games on these apps using their own money. And the use case is slightly different, although the experience is gaming. The expectation is towards that these needs to be consistent transactions. Many times real money gaming requires like all of this data, stored within a particular location. They have to be developed in a way that the users know there is no fraud happening. Companies need to know who provide these games, that they need to know their customers, because there can be a lot of finicky things that can happen. So obviously these are the two different experience in the gaming space. But the requirements around scale, high availability, serving a global user base, or guaranteeing consistency, these are all requirements that both these use cases have today. And more today, that if a game goes down, you're going to see a bunch of unhappy users talking about that on X or in socials, which is really bad for a company's reputation, as well as the whole overall story, for them as a company. However, for real-time gaming, scaling based on demand, or maintaining high availability and serving a user base that's global is critical. Obviously, they have to have consistent transactions, but at least these are the few reasons that we have seen customers talk about CockroachDB, and then running CockroachDB for those games on AWS. Similarly, or in this case, what really happens is, like, if there's a user who is in US and that game's really small at the time, if they have to grow that game, they need to think about, okay, how can I make this game available? How can I make sure that there is multiplayer and there is multi-match and leaderboards happening? And these games particularly require distributed scale, high availability, low latency, and multi-region support. And CockroachDB provides that, and we're going to dive into that. Similarly, when it comes to real money gaming, the key thing that we are seeing is that folks want to be able to deploy hybrid architectures, where they're like, hey, we have complex regulations, we have to make sure that all of this data is processed within a particular state or a location, and how can I like continue to be on the cloud but take advantages of a hybrid architecture? And we're going to talk more about how we can do that. So that's how, at least in these two different game use cases, CockroachDB with AWS is becoming successful. And if you are somebody who is on this path to kind of build a game or move some of your use cases to the cloud, and are looking to modernize or need the scale, high availability, want to serve a global customer base, then CockroachDB with AWS is going to be a great solution for you. Now, with that, let's talk about where does CockroachDB fit. So, for folks who are new to CockroachDB, the way I like to present this, the database is like CockroachDB is actually the latest, evolution of all the databases that have come before it, right? So there used to be a relational database, and what relational databases did really well was they would provide strong data consistency. You could do transactions, you could do change data capture, a bunch of things on those relational databases. You can communicate with these databases using normal, query language, that is SQL or SQL. And around 2007 and 8, we saw this growth of applications that led to this requirement around horizontal vertical scaling. folks wanted to do online schema changes, do rolling upgrades without bringing the application down. They wanted low latency, performance. And so that gave birth to a new set of databases called NoSQL databases. And around 2012, 13, we really saw, with AWS really leading the path, a lot of folks deciding to run their applications and their use cases on cloud. So it became necessary for these databases to serve cloud native paradigms. That was, make sure that these databases run on in a multi-region fashion, or on, multiple availability zones. They should be elastic. They should run on Kubernetes, and they should support, different types of, hybrid deployments. And today, in the last few years, we have come to realize that there is a requirement for enterprise ready capabilities. That means these databases should support PCI or HIPAA, as well as, I mean, if you're in gaming, that in the US, you have to support, the Wire Act, or if you're in EMEA, you have to support GDPR. So bunch of compliance regulations. So that led to the requirement: how can we do data locality and data domiciling on existing databases? So what CockroachDB really does is actually brings all these capabilities together into one database, which is what we call CockroachDB. And we are the leading distributed SQL database platform on the planet today. And we are available today on AWS Marketplace, as well as you can run, our product as a self-hosted solution on EC2, EKS, any instance that you have on AWS, or we also have a cloud offering, which is a SaaS solution. However, you might say, "Hey, David, this is great. I mean, this makes sense, but how are you guys different? There are so many different databases." So the way I like to communicate this is like, CockroachDB does resilience different, and it's really different because my own experience using a previous database was not sufficient enough that it led me to using CockroachDB, and I found like, okay, this makes sense. CockroachDB does resilience different. So typically, when you deploy CockroachDB on any environment, or any a particular data center on in a region, you can run it in a single region. Like that's like the base setup, right? You want to run in a single region, and then you want to be like, hey, I want to scale this. How can I scale that? Well, you can actually continue to deploy CockroachDB across multiple regions. So you can have like a single region or a multi-region setup that serves tier 0, tier 1 applications. And when I say tier 1, tier 0 application, we're talking about applications that require zero downtime and high availability. And so the idea is that you as a user are thinking about, hey, how can I scale? And my requirements of scale require multiple regions, right? So this is the kind of architecture you will choose. But what does this mean? So when we zoom into a single region, actually CockroachDB runs as a cluster of multiple instances. So in this particular case, if you're running CockroachDB in a single region, this is how you will run it. You will run it on AWS in one region, say US East 1, across multiple availability zones. And the idea of availability zones is that there is at least 50, 60, 70 miles distance between multiple availability zones. So together, when they run as 6 instances of CockroachDB running as one database. So in this case, what really happens is, even if an availability zone is not available, data is available on other availability zones. So your game or whatever application that you have will continue to support the user experience, and you'll always have availability. However, we also know that there are situations where an entire region can go down, and which has happened in the past. So how do you mitigate for that? How do you make sure that resilience always make sure that things are running all the time? So in this case, users get the ability to run CockroachDB across US or EMEA or APAC, or if you're running within US in US East 1, maybe a central setup, and maybe in the West. And in this way, even if an entire region is not available, the application can repoint to the other nodes and continue to serve the user. So you always have high availability. And these are not the only deployment patterns. CockroachDB also now supports two DC setups. That means you can have two regions, and you can have them either active active or active passive, depending on what your use case is. However, if the goal is highest form of availability, then typically we have seen users choose resilience in a multi-region setup. That means they will have multiple regions serving. So you will have like a 9 node cluster, and this 9 node cluster would be like 9 instances of EC2 with CockroachDB running on them. That's just an example of how it will look on AWS. Now, That leads us to the second, capability of CockroachDB, that we give you controls to, operate and control data placement. What that really means is that for folks running CockroachDB, you might have a global cluster, right? That means you have clusters running, across multiple regions. We give you and the users the ability to go in and tie data down to specific regions. So you can say, hey, all of this data should not leave, EMEA, or all of this data should stay within a particular state. So you have the ability to kind of pin data down specifically. And obviously you have a global cluster. So when you read data locally from a particular region, your latencies are going to be way small. However, if you try to read data out from another region that's like a far off region, you have to consider the speed of light. However, we allow users to meet data regulatory requirements because we can pin data down to a specific region, and we take advantage of AWS's global setup where where we have all of these regions available, where we can actually deploy CockroachDB and have like a one single cluster experience for all these games and applications. But how does data locality really work? You might be considering, like, well, I have a global scalable application. How do we do this? How do we make sure that data doesn't go down? So we use this concept of replication. So typically, let's take an example that users are trying to write data to CockroachDB, and imagine they want to write names of dogs. And what we have here is we take that data and we break it into small ranges, and we call these small ranges, they are 512 megabyte small ranges, and then we actually replicate these. So typically by default, there is a replication strategy, and by default, it's actually three. So you can think about a range is copied at least three times, and the replication strategy can change depending on your survivability goals. But typically, what happens is we take that, we copy it multiple times. So this way, we have multiple copies of the data available for a same set of range. So even when say one node is not available, other nodes have the copy in the form of those ranges, and then users can actually read that data anytime, even if a node goes down. And even in a scenario where, say, a particular node goes down, if the node doesn't come back in a certain amount of time, we can add a new node, and in the backend, data will get replenished, and the server will be, or the cluster will be made whole. So that's how we actually kind of make sure that the copies of the data are available because of the innate replication capability in CockroachDB. However, this now scales out when you're doing, read and write anywhere. So if you have, a multi-region setup, you can actually have your replicas go across multiple regions. So you can have, say, three copies in one region and a couple of other copies in other regions. So even when an entire region goes down, copies are available in other regions to be read from, and the application will always feel like a always on, always available experience. Uh, However, this is where we kind of bring the ability to pin data down. Users can actually go in, as I was saying, can say, okay, all of this data in this particular schema or in this table gets pinned to this particular region. And so that ways you can actually localize the data to particular regions, and that allows for a low latency experience as well. So that's really like a game changer, especially for real money gaming, where folks are like, well, we have this requirement where all of this data should be processed within a particular region. So there are these differentiators that CockroachDB has that are really, really valuable. And this also benefits, folks who are trying to run, leaderboards or matchmaking where they want to have low latency. So they can say, hey, all of this data for these users should stay within this region. So when they're trying to do matchmaking, they're not going across multiple regions. They can actually do matchmaking across just users in a particular region. And that ways you reduce latency as well. So that really helps. So I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to bring back Ben because Ben and I have been talking about the whole CockroachDB AWS story for a while. Ben, what were some of the things that really fascinated you as somebody who heard the CockroachDB story, especially with regard to some of the use cases in gaming?
What's really been interesting to me is about bringing the data closer to where the action happens with the game server. To be honest, it's providing that flexibility to customers where we might not have a native database service that can reside solely in one state, for example. I think Cockroach really interesting to me because of the kind of scaling anywhere that the players are showing activity. I think that's a really interesting interesting feature overall of this. A distributed, strongly consistent database. But I think we're seeing some interesting questions come into the chat, and I may throw a couple out there at you if or do you
Yeah,
want
absolutely.
to?
Let's go for that. Yeah.
Okay. I think you touched on this a little bit, but one of them is with global players, how does CockroachDB assist in complying with regional data regulations, and what features support data localization? Like, can I pin a row down? I mean, how fine grained can I get with the data, and is that difficult to manage? I'll say, multiple applications. How do
Yeah.
we simply pin things down?
Right. So in CockroachDB, there's this concept of global table and local table. And what really happens is when users are actually setting up, particular tables, they can define these tables to be global or local. And so when you define a table as a local table within a particular region, you have to define, okay, this table only this region, US East 1. And this table is global, so you declare all the different regions, US East 1, West 2, and say Central. So when you define that like that, all the data in the table will be, replicated and stored within a particular region. We don't do row level, uh, we do table level. So that's how it'll go.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, that I think that answers that one. There are a couple others in here. One, I'll take this one. What's one AWS service that game developers often overlook, but should definitely use? And the one that comes right to mind there is probably our global accelerator service. This is a really neat service that really allows maximizing the use of the AWS backbone. Super fast networking that connect all our regions globally. AWS Global Accelerator really it's almost an out of the box accelerator for games. We talk about latency, bringing that down. It allows players, instead of hitting regional IP addresses, hitting things that are much closer to home, and then transiting most of that data across the AWS backbone, or all that data across the AWS backbone. And I've seen examples where simply turning it on cuts latency by 60%. I mean, pretty
Wow.
significant. And if you look at, the other side of that being, EC2 instances as targets, potentially with a CockroachDB, Cockroach database running on it, you can really get to some impressive latency numbers, between player and game, player and data.
Yeah. And threading off on that, what kind of load balances do people use when they have like a multi-region gaming setup that you have seen?
I've seen a mix of, I mean, I think they're pretty heavily using like network load balancers, but application as well. I mean, it is kind of dependent upon the game and what layer in which it's going to be used. But
Right.
I see a combination of the two depending on what part of the back end is being used.
Brilliant. Yeah. There's another question that I think Lee asked. Does that mean that there's no need to take backups? Well, if you are a if you are a confident person, you could choose to not do backups, but we won't recommend that. I mean, for any database, especially in real money gaming, you want to make sure that you have backups because there are requirements by law that you need to make sure all of this data is available to be seen at any given point. The idea of high availability and backups, I like to look at it separately, right? When we say data is always available, that means the data is on the cluster all the time available, and there is a possibility that like nodes can go down, regions can go down, but your data will always be available. So from a high availability point of view, you are covered. However, you still want to make sure that data is backed up because there are requirements around, with the law that require backup. So in production, we have typically see everyone taking backups. Now, just depends on how much of the backup snapshot folks say. Some people take 24 hours, just to make sure they have that covered. depending on the RTO, RPO requirements, folks kind of choose to take backups. But again, you will take backups typically in production. At least that's what I've seen. However, yeah, you have to be you have this confidence that data is always available. So in many cases, this you won't require it to be used. So hopefully that helps. Um, well, with that, let's quickly talk about a couple of customer success stories. And I'm going to talk about two customer stories. We have this customer called Devsisters. I don't know how many of you are aware of them. They're a South Korean based mobile gaming company, and they have this game called Cookie Run Kingdom. And they started working with us a few years ago. Today they run CockroachDB on AWS that supports about 8 million of their monthly active users. So when they started engaging with us, some of their challenges were that they wanted a database that could support transactions, that could scale horizontally to accommodate traffic spikes. And so their requirements were around, hey, they needed to scale, they needed to maintain consistency, they wanted to support unpredictable traffic. They wanted to accommodate write heavy transactions because the use case that they were looking to use were keeping basically the game interactions on the database, right? So what they came to realize was their previous solution, they were using Couchbase with MySQL, that wasn't cutting it for them. So they started looking at CockroachDB as a solution because we are SQL compatible database. So anything and everything that users or developers are used to with like a SQL is available with CockroachDB. So today they run CockroachDB to serve as the system of record for their event and snapshot data. That means like all these player interactions they're running on AWS EKS. It's a Kubernetes cluster with about 90 nodes split across a single region with multiple availability zones. So if you remember one of the first slides that I presented, that's how they've kind of set up, but everything is running in EKS. So today, they have about 8 million active users and they've accumulated about 40 million cumulative users. So we were able to meet that requirement for them, and together with AWS, they're able to serve their gaming users. The other example I want to bring up is, Hard Rock Digital. Now, if you're somebody who's heard of Hard Rock, Hard Rock Cafe, a bunch of other experience that Hard Rock provides. But you might not be somebody who's familiar with Hard Rock Digital because you're used to some of the experience. But here, Hard Rock Digital actually has this betting app that they have that allows users to actually do betting. And one of their requirements, for the Hard Rock betting use cases was around, we want to make sure that for folks who are using their actual money to do betting on sports, how can we make sure that there is a compliance, right? So they wanted to make sure that all of this data stays within different states, where even in states where cloud providers don't have data centers. So and they wanted to make sure, because this is a betting app, there is high availability, high consistency, and they could scale in a multi-region fashion. Now, this was a situation where we collaborated and worked closely with AWS because for folks who might be unfamiliar, AWS has a service called AWS Outpost. This basically the ability for companies to acquire like a rack setup that has its own network and compute, and it also connects to the AWS cloud setup. So you can actually take an Outpost rack, set it up wherever you want, and make sure that it's connected to the cloud environment, and that allows for a hybrid setup. So today, Hard Rock Digital and a bunch of our other customers who do similar betting kind of use cases run CockroachDB in a hybrid fashion on Outpost along with like an AWS region. So each of these regions, where Outpost is running, runs as a gateway, where all of this data specific to betting and specific to transactions happening around these betting use cases stays within that particular outpost in that particular region, serving the users who are doing millions of transactions, but at the same time also serving the users who are looking for like this high availability experience. And now I'm going to bring in Ben here because Ben, I remember when we talked about AWS Outpost, that was also a service that users not many users are aware of. So is this like an unsung hero for AWS, this capability that AWS Outpost has?
No, so yeah, Outpost is a neat solution in that it brings a bit of AWS cloud into your premise effectively. It's still managed hardware, but it lets you do a number of things very much in the four walls of your own building. And it is a perfect use case for this, where you need guaranteed data residency requirements and processing in particular. So again, if it can't live in one of the main regions, Outpost provides a really nice solution to, again, bring a bit of AWS cloud onto the premise.
Brilliant. Yeah. So, I mean, that was awesome. I mean, you can see how Ben is a seasoned AWS person with like amazing experience talking about what are the best solutions to use for gaming. So with that, that's a great segue to if you are somebody who's trying to modernize your systems or your gaming use cases with CockroachDB and AWS, I would say there are these four areas where we can help. So if you're looking for your use cases that need to scale in a multi-region fashion or in a hybrid situation, using CockroachDB with AWS is going to be great. With the resiliency, obviously, as I was describing, we have highest form of availability. You can look at using CockroachDB with AWS to provide zero downtime experience. And again, if you are data regulation and you have these compliance requirements, obviously there are multiple solutions that we offer. Obviously, Outpost with AWS is a great solution to deploy the cloud wherever you want to, but at the same time, with our ability to pin data down, together it becomes like a use case that is solved with CockroachDB and AWS. And we've also seen a lot of use cases where folks have their games running on old setups where they have like Postgres or SQL Server, or they're using MySQL with Couchbase, as I was saying, or Oracle. And if you're looking to like modernize some of your applications or these gaming experience, you can actually choose to run them on CockroachDB with AWS. So just a few thoughts for you to kind of think about as you go back. I'm going to bring Ben back here and talk about some of the cool things that we have done together. Obviously, as I was saying, we are available today on all cloud environments. Obviously, Outpost is another one that we support. Multi-region, we today support almost 20 plus integrations with Amazon. So if you're somebody who wants to use like Lambda, or you have requirements around using specific monitoring solutions, or specific security capabilities from AWS, we integrate with all of that. And obviously, we are a solution that's available on AWS Marketplace with the pay as you go. But I'll bring Ben here, and Ben, I mean, I wanted to kind of talk about one thing, specifically around some of your experiences running games or like gaming use cases. What has been one of the most underrated application experiences or gaming experiences that AWS provides for the users?
That's a good question. Pretty broad, lots of it's always very dependent upon the game and the use case in particular, but it's really about being able to leverage this global infrastructure to very quickly turn on and off resources in order to, be just in time for that player base. And whether it's some of our native services or underlying, compute, networking, storage infrastructure, or, along with solutions like Cockroach Labs, we power some of the biggest titles out there. And, we've got a pretty long list of where AWS has helped, again, some of the biggest titles scale. I mean, and, I run into it almost on a weekly basis of, working with a smaller mobile developer, for example, that they saw a bit more success than they expected, and they needed to go from, say 20 container instances up to 200 rather
Mm.
quickly. But I think that's really the power of what AWS provides, is that instant on type of capability to scale out services. Now, what I tell every gaming customer is that, have an observability plan, understand your atomic element of your game, like that server, what can it host? What kind of, what kind of margins are you provided on that? But, as long as, we can help build architectures that scale horizontally, meaning, copy and paste game servers in a way to the right, services like GameLift, really can help handle scaling as well as matchmaking that infrastructure. So I don't know if that's the answer that you were
Yeah,
looking
I mean,
for,
it
but
was a broad question, but I mean, we just wanted to talk about how AWS can help with the users, right? So it's awesome. So if you're somebody looking to, start, I would say start building your own games. I mean, this GIF that you see here is actually a game that I built about 1.5 years ago. This is me
definitely a gift.
wipe,
Definitely.
yeah. It was me vibe coding to build this game called Cockroach Labs, and we actually ran this game and played with my team internally to test it out on AWS. So we actually deployed this on AWS in a multi-region fashion. I was running US East 1, West 2, and US West 2, EU West 2. And then we used a gaming engine called Nakama that is by a company called Heroic Labs, was also a common customer for both AWS and us. And I use that engine for authentication, matchmaking, leaderboard, and multiplayer selection, and ran it with this particular architecture. And so you know what I've come to realize is with where the industry is going today, with all the kind of services available, building a game to scaling it with all the services that are available is much more easier than how it was before. So please, if you want to learn more, hit Ben up, hit me up, hit our team up. We would love to give you some more details. You can go, find us on the marketplace on AWS and go check out all the different services that Ben kind of spoke about today. Um, if you don't want to wait for that, or you hate scanning, I would say if you're going to GDC, we have a GDC event coming up in on March 18th this month. Uh, I believe it's in the Bay Area, right, Ben?
That's right. Yeah, right next to the Moscone Center where GDC or the Game Developer Conference is taking place.
Yes. So hit that location, and we'll be hosting an event at the Dirty Habit inside the Hotel Zelos. So between 5:30 to 8:30. So if you're somebody who's available who wants to go catch up with the team, Ben's going to be there, and a bunch of our team is going to be there to talk about how we can help you, build your gaming experiences on CockroachDB and AWS. So hopefully that helps. Ben, anything else that you want to talk about with GDC around booth that you have for AWS?
Yeah, I mean, if there's AWS interest in general, we've got a pretty good presence there. I will be chained to that booth for part of the day, most of the conference. So,
Yeah.
feel free to come talk to me. And in general, we're going to be showing a lot of really neat stuff at GDC, and I hope to meet up with some of you as well at the Dirty Habit with the Cockroach team as well. Again, we're excited for solutions like this that really help game developers focus on the game and not worry as much about the infrastructure management, all the bits and pieces that go into making a live service kind of game. So
Awesome. Well, so I hope you had a great time. We're gonna take a few minutes to answer any questions. I know we have had a colleague who has been answering questions on the Q&A panel, but if you would like to ask some more questions, we can take them now. All right. So there is a question. I think, Ben, this one's for you. Can you give an example of a game that solved the scalability challenge with AWS?
oh, like I said, there there are a number of them, but I mean, I can rattle off a few. I mean, big titles. I mean, look at Fortnite, look at, some of the live events that they do. I mean, I think it's exciting to see how and it makes sense to me why the industry is switching to these kind of live service types of games, to maintain engagement. Um, but, again, Fortnite, Pokemon Go, even Monopoly Go more recently. There are a lot of titles out there that are hosted on AWS where we help with these scaling challenges. And again, there's some critical things to keep in mind, around really understanding your application, understanding your back end and its behavior, and then really having a plan for observability because things don't, being able to adjust to scale as you see trends in usage is really important. And a lot of it can be automated at the same time, managing an observability layer for the overall infrastructure is really critical as well. So, you know, but again, I think there's probably another, gosh, 10 titles or so I can
Yeah.
rattle up where AWS has helped, serve, tens of millions of players, globally across these. And it's all with the services that I mentioned over the course of this webinar.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ben. I think that's it for questions. I just have a question that I'm curious about. What's your game? Like, what do you game? Being a person who supports gaming.
Oh yeah, of course. There is nothing more rewarding than, say firing up the Roblox player on my machine. No,
Very
that's
good.
that's for my 10-year-old. Which again, that's one of those mind-blowing things that you're like, we were all about, I feel like my generation getting more and more hyper realistic with games. And now you see some of the bigger titles out there, really popular with kids, takes more of the blocky kind of tone. But
Agreed.
sometimes you'll find me playing Goat Simulator.
Hmm.
That's a great title, good and
Interesting.
creative.
Yeah.
Um, a little RDR2. Again, I move around a bit, but at the same time, more and more these days, I'm looking over my son's shoulder and seeing what folks are pushing, through Roblox experiences. So,
True. I think Roblox is, I mean, it was a great experience for kids. My daughter is still on the Switch,
mhm.
so we've tried to protect her from getting overexposed so far. But hopefully, the gaming experience is going to continue to evolve for her, and she's going to start playing some really cool games. But yeah, I'm myself like a Call of Duty guy here. So if you ever want to like get on
All
and play
right.
like a game, we can do that. But yeah, I mean, once again, I thank you, Ben, for coming on this webinar and being a guest speaker. I really appreciate that. And for all of our attendees today, hopefully you had a great time listening to Ben and I talk about CockroachDB with AWS. We would love to connect with you. Please hit us up on the socials on LinkedIn. I'm available as David Joy on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with you and talk about how we can work together and help you. Ben, you're available on LinkedIn as well. I believe it's Ben Cook.
Indeed, indeed. Ben Cook, Cook with an E. So,
Very good.
yeah.
So yeah, you can find him. So once again, thank you so much, guys, and look forward to catching up with you another time. Have a great day.